James Miller stared at his reflection in his apartment's bathroom mirror, deliberately messing up his usually neat dark hair. At 35, he was about to become the youngest police chief in Brooklyn's history. But tonight, nobody would know that. He traded his tailored suits for his nephew's old Columbia University hoodie and a pair of worn jeans that had definitely seen better days. The transformation was already impressive, but he wasn't done yet. He grabbed the fake glasses he bought from a corner store. Thick-rimmed and slightly crooked, they completely changed his face. His wife Jessica had laughed when he explained his plan over breakfast, but she understood why he needed to do this. "Just don't get yourself arrested," she joked, not entirely kidding. The official ceremony wasn't until next week. The mayor's office had wanted to make a big deal about it. Press conferences, speeches, the whole 9 yards. But James had different plans for his first days on the job. 20 years ago, his mentor, retired Chief Frank O'Malley, had taught him something invaluable. You can't lead what you don't understand. James grabbed the keys to his nephew's beat-up Honda Civic, a far cry from his Tesla Model 3. The car's heater barely worked, and the right taillight flickered occasionally. Perfect. He'd specifically asked for a car with minor issues, something that might catch a patrol officer's attention without being obviously dangerous. As he pulled out of his parking garage, the city was transforming. The usual daytime bustle had given way to that peculiar nighttime energy that only Brooklyn possessed. Street vendors were packing up their carts, while neon signs flickered to life above countless bodegas. The evening air held that distinct January chill that made even the toughest New Yorkers walk a little faster. His phone buzzed. Another text from Deputy Chief Roberts. "Where are you? The transition team needs signatures on those budget reports." James smiled, leaving it unanswered. The paperwork could wait. Tonight was about something more important. He'd spent weeks studying patrol patterns, shift changes, and officer behaviors. He knew which precincts had the most civilian complaints, which intersections saw the most traffic stops, and most importantly, which officers had reputation for being creative with their authority. The data painted an interesting picture, but numbers could lie. He needed to see the truth with his own eyes. The car's temperature gauge was stuck, but the frost forming on the edges of his windshield told him all he needed to know. It was the kind of cold that made people irritable, officers included. Perfect conditions for his experiment. As he drove through different neighborhoods, James noticed how the police presence changed. More patrol cars in some areas, fewer in others. He made mental notes, already forming plans for better resource distribution. But his main focus tonight was on officer behavior. He checked his watch. 11:45 p.m. The late shift would be halfway through their tour, that dangerous time when boredom could lead to poor decisions. He deliberately missed a stop sign, then corrected too quickly. Nothing dangerous, just the kind of minor mistakes that might attract attention. In his rearview mirror, he spotted what he was waiting for, the distinctive headlights of a patrol car pulling out to follow him. James felt his heart rate pick up, not from fear, but from anticipation. After 20 years on the force, he thought he'd seen it all. But tonight, he was about to experience policing from a completely different perspective. He eased off the gas, letting the patrol car catch up. The moment of truth was approaching, and James Miller, the secret chief of police, was ready to learn some difficult truths about his department. The patrol car's lights flashed to life behind James, painting the empty street in alternating splashes of red and blue. He pulled over smoothly, positioning his nephew's Honda exactly as the police academy taught, slightly angled toward the curb, wheels turned out for safety. Old habits died hard. His breath clouded in front of his face as the car's dying heater finally gave up. The dashboard clock blinked 11:52 p.m., and the frost on his side mirrors had grown thicker. Through his rearview mirror, he watched two officers emerge from their patrol car, their movements telling him everything he needed to know. The way they swaggered up to his car, taking their time despite the biting cold, spoke volumes. Officer Brad Thompson led the way, a flashlight beam dancing deliberately across James's side mirror, while Officer Rick Martinez hung back, hand resting casually on his belt. James recognized their body language from countless civilian complaints he'd reviewed. The kind that never quite had enough evidence to stick. License and registration, Thompson drawled, shining his flashlight directly into James's eyes. The beam lingered there a few seconds longer than necessary. Any idea why we stopped you tonight? James played his part perfectly, fumbling with his wallet like a nervous civilian. No, sir. I don't think I was speeding. He let his voice trail off, uncertain. Martinez snickered from the passenger side window, his breath visible in the freezing air. That heap you're driving has a broken taillight, among other problems. He rapped his knuckles on the rusty roof. This thing belongs in a junkyard. James noticed how neither officer had introduced themselves or stated the actual reason for the stop, both violations of department policy. He handed over his license, carefully prepared weeks ago. James Parker, the ID read, with an address from one of Brooklyn's less affluent neighborhoods. Thompson studied the license, then looked back at James with a smirk. Step out of the vehicle, Mr. Parker. It wasn't a request. The wind had picked up, cutting through James's hoodie as he stepped onto the sidewalk. His shoes crunched on salt crystals spread to fight the ice. Around them, Brooklyn slept, windows dark except for the occasional blue flicker of late-night TV. No witnesses except the security camera on the bodega across the street, a camera James knew hadn't worked in months. You seem nervous, Mr. Parker, Thompson said, circling him slowly. Got anything in that car we should know about? No, sir, James replied, letting just the right amount of anxiety creep into his voice. It's my nephew's car. I'm just borrowing it to get home from work. Work, Martinez chimed in, peering through the car windows. What kind of work has you out this late? I'm a janitor at the hospital. Night shift. The officers exchanged looks. James saw something pass between them, that dangerous mix of boredom and authority that too often led to abuse of power. He'd seen it before, but usually from the other side of the badge. Well, Mr. Parker, Thompson said, drawing out each word, we could write you up for that taillight. That's a pretty hefty fine these days. But he paused, that smirk growing wider. Maybe we can work something else out. James felt the temperature dropping further, but it wasn't just the cold that sent a chill down his spine. He was about to witness firsthand exactly what he'd come out here to see. And from the gleam in Officer Thompson's eye, it wasn't going to be pleasant. Officer Thompson's boots crunched on the frozen sidewalk as he circled James again, reminding him of a shark sizing up its prey. The street was eerily quiet now. Even the usual Brooklyn night sounds seemed muffled by the cold. A lone taxi crawled past, its driver deliberately looking straight ahead, wanting no part of whatever was happening. Here's the deal, Mr. Parker, Thompson said, stopping directly in front of James. That taillight ticket's gonna cost you about $200. But I'm feeling generous tonight. He glanced at his partner, who was already pulling out his phone. Maybe we can work out an alternative payment plan. James noticed how Martinez positioned himself to get the best camera angle, clearly anticipating what was coming. The phone screen cast a pale blue glow on his face, highlighting his amused expression. This wasn't their first time pulling this routine. James could tell by how rehearsed it felt. What kind of alternative, sir? James asked, letting his shoulders slump slightly, playing the part of someone who knew they were trapped in a power game they couldn't win. 50 push-ups. Right here, right now. Thompson gestured to the icy sidewalk. Think of it as community fitness training. Martinez chuckled, already hitting record on his phone. A group of late-night partygoers appeared at the corner, then quickly crossed to the other side of the street when they spotted the police lights. James noticed how neither officer seemed concerned about potential witnesses. That kind of confidence only came from knowing you never faced consequences. Push-ups. But it's freezing out here, James protested mildly, watching how they reacted to even this small challenge to their authority. "Oh, I'm sorry." Thompson's voice dripped with mock concern. "Would you prefer the ticket? Maybe a full vehicle inspection? I'm sure we could find a few more violations if we really looked." He patted the Honda's hood. This beauty probably has all kinds of interesting surprises under the hood. James weighed his options, exactly as a real civilian in this situation would have to do. The threats weren't even subtle anymore. He could see his breath in the air as he considered his next move, each exhale a small cloud of frustration. "Tick-tock, Mr. Parker," Martinez called out, his phone steady in his hands. "We got all night, but that sidewalk's just getting colder." A police radio crackled from their patrol car, another unit calling in a routine check. Thompson reached over and turned the volume down without taking his eyes off James. The message was clear, no interruptions for their little show. "Okay," James said finally, his voice carrying just the right mix of resignation and suppressed anger. 50 push-ups, and then I can go." "Smart choice," Thompson grinned. "And make them good ones. Officer Martinez here is a fitness enthusiast. He'll know if you're not giving it your all." James slowly took off his glasses and handed them to Thompson, who dangled them carelessly from one finger. The sidewalk glistened with a thin layer of ice, promising a thoroughly unpleasant experience. As he got down into position, James could feel the cold seeping through his jeans where his knees touched the ground. "Action," Martinez called out gleefully, zooming in with his phone. "This is gonna be way better than our last one. Remember that kid with the skateboard?" James placed his palms on the freezing concrete, knowing that somewhere in the city, dozens of other citizens were probably facing similar humiliations tonight. But unlike those citizens, he could actually do something about it. Tomorrow. 1. Thompson called out as James lowered himself to the frozen concrete. "My grandmother can do better than that." "Get lower." The ice beneath James's palms had already melted from his body heat, leaving his hands pressed against the wet, frigid sidewalk. Each push-up sent a sharp chill through his arms, but he maintained perfect form, something that would surely puzzle these officers later. 2, 3, 4. Martinez counted, his phone capturing every moment. "Hey Brad, check out how his hoodie says Columbia. Bet he bought that at some street vendor. No way this guy went to college." James kept his face neutral, focusing on his breathing, just like he did during his actual daily workouts. 20 years of police training and maintaining fitness standards meant these push-ups weren't nearly the challenge Thompson and Martinez hoped they'd be. 10, 11. The counting continued, punctuated by their running commentary. A passing city bus slowed down, its passengers pressing against the windows to watch the scene. James noticed how neither officer seemed concerned about being observed. Their laughter echoed off the buildings as he continued the ordered exercise. 25. Thompson announced, halfway through. "Getting tired yet, Mr. Parker? Those hospital floors must not give you much of a workout." He walked around James in a slow circle, boots deliberately entering his line of sight. The cold had fully penetrated James's hoodie now, but he kept going with mechanical precision. His mind was elsewhere, memorizing details. Thompson's badge number partially visible beneath his winter coat, the precinct number on their patrol car, the small dent in the rear quarter panel that shouldn't be there according to vehicle maintenance logs. 32, 33. Martinez zoomed in closer with his phone. "This is going on our greatest hits collection, Brad. Right up there with the hot dog vendor." Another patrol car cruised by slowly. James caught the unit number, 2716, and noted how the officers inside merely waved and continued on their way. More evidence of a department-wide culture that needed changing. 40. Thompson's voice carried a hint of disappointment that James wasn't struggling more. 10 more to go, tough guy. Unless you want to make it an even 100. James kept pushing, his arms moving steadily despite the numbness creeping into his fingers. He could hear Martinez sending the video to someone, the notification sounds chiming from his phone. evidence spreading through the department's unofficial channels, making his job tomorrow easier. 48, 49, 50. Martins lowered his phone with a whistle. Well, would you look at that? Our janitor friend is quite the athlete. James stood up slowly, his wet palms stinging in the cold air. He made a show of breathing heavily, playing his part until the end. Small circles of melted ice marked where his hands had been, already starting to refreeze. Here's your glasses, college boy. Thompson tossed them carelessly. Let that be a lesson about maintaining your vehicle. We wouldn't want to have to stop you again, would we? James cleaned his glasses carefully with the edge of his hoodie, using the moment to study their name tags one last time. Behind him, he could hear them laughing as they walked back to their patrol car, already discussing where to get coffee. Have a good night, officers, James called after them, allowing himself a small smile. In less than 12 hours, he'd be the one behind a desk, and this night would become a turning point for the entire department. Brad Thompson strolled into the precinct at 8:45 a.m., carrying a tray of coffee cups from the corner bakery. The morning sun streamed through the windows, making the fresh snow outside sparkle. He handed one cup to Rick Martinez, who was already showing last night's video to a group of laughing officers gathered around his desk. Play it again, Officer Jenny Rogers said, leaning in closer. I can't believe he actually did all 50. Most of them give up around 20. That's because Brad here can be very persuasive. Martins grinned, hitting replay. The break room buzzed with morning energy as more officers filtered in, drawn by the laughter and storytelling. Did you see his face when I suggested 100? Thompson took a victory sip of his coffee. Priceless. These night shifts aren't so bad when you can have a little fun. The precinct's usual morning chaos surrounded them. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the scanner crackling with routine calls. Nobody noticed Captain Wilson walking in with an unusually serious expression until he cleared his throat loudly. Everyone in the main conference room. Now, his voice cut through the chatter. New chiefs here for the morning briefing. No exceptions, no excuses. Thompson rolled his eyes at Martinez. Great, another stuffed shirt from downtown telling us how to do our jobs. He crumpled his coffee cup and tossed it in the trash. Bet this one lasts 3 months before transferring to a cushy desk job. The officers filed into the conference room, claiming their usual seats. Thompson and Martinez took their favorite spots in the back, perfect for making quiet comments without being noticed. The room hummed with speculation about the new chief. Nobody had seen so much as a photo yet. I heard he's some hotshot from Manhattan, whispered Officer Rogers from the row in front. Youngest chief in. The door opened. Captain Wilson walked in, followed by a man in a crisp blue uniform with chief stars gleaming on his collar. Thompson's coffee cup slipped from his suddenly numb fingers, splashing across the floor. There, standing at the podium with perfect posture and an unreadable expression, was the janitor from last night. Gone were the fake glasses and messy hair. The Columbia hoodie had been replaced by a perfectly pressed uniform. But the face, that face Thompson had smirked at just hours ago, was unmistakably the same. Good morning, officers. James Miller's voice carried easily across the now silent room. I believe some of you already know me, though perhaps not in this capacity. Martinez's phone slid from his hand, clattering on the table. In the stark fluorescent lighting of the conference room, he looked like he might be sick. Before we begin today's briefing, Miller continued, reaching for a laptop on the podium, I'd like to review some footage from last night's patrol activities. He looked directly at Thompson and Martinez. I found it quite educational. The projector hummed to life, and there it was, Martinez's video, now playing on the giant screen at the front of the room. Thompson watched in horror as his own voice filled the room. 50 push-ups, right here, right now. Every head in the conference room slowly turned toward the back, where Thompson and Martinez sat frozen in their chairs. Chief Miller's voice cut through the heavy silence like a knife through butter. Now then, officers, Let's talk about proper use of authority, shall we? The video played in its entirety, each second feeling like an eternity to Thompson and Martinez. Their laughter from last night now echoed hollowly through the conference room speakers, sounding far more cruel in the morning light. The last frame froze on screen. James Miller, unknown to them, then as their future chief, pushing himself up from the icy sidewalk for the 50th time. Chief Miller let the silence stretch for a moment, his eyes scanning the room. Some officers stared at their laps, others couldn't look away from the screen. In the back, Thompson had turned an interesting shade of pale, while Martinez seemed to be trying to slide under the table. Last night, Miller began, his voice calm and measured. The temperature dropped to 26 degrees. "Did you know that, Officer Thompson?" He didn't wait for an answer. The wind chill made it feel like 18. Perfect weather for an outdoor fitness session, wouldn't you agree? A few nervous coughs broke the silence. Miller walked around the podium, his polished shoes clicking on the floor. Now I could stand here and list every department policy that was violated in that 9-minute video. The unauthorized filming of civilians. He clicked to the next slide, showing Martinez with his phone. The failure to properly identify yourselves. Another click, another damning image. The implied threats of additional citations. Thompson finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "Sir, we were just having some fun." Miller finished for him. "Yes, I heard that part clearly this morning when you were sharing the video." He gestured to the group of officers who'd been laughing around Martinez's desk earlier. Several of them seemed very interested in the ceiling tiles now. Miller walked slowly down the center aisle, every eye following him. "You know what struck me most? Not a single patrol car that passed by stopped to question what was happening. Not one officer thought it might be worth checking why 2 of their colleagues had a civilian doing push-ups in freezing weather." He reached the back row and turned to face the entire room. That suggests something far more concerning than 2 officers abusing their authority. It suggests a culture where this behavior has become normal. From their seats, Thompson and Martinez watched as their careers crumbled in real time. The chief's next words confirmed their fears. "Officer Thompson, Officer Martinez, you'll report to Internal Affairs immediately after this meeting. The rest of you." Miller's gaze swept across the room. "Consider this your first and only warning. The old way of doing things ends today." He walked back to the podium, but stopped halfway. "Oh, and for those wondering, yes, I completed all 50 push-ups. Unlike some of you, I believe in leading by example, which is why." Miller removed his jacket, carefully laying it across the podium. The room watched in stunned silence as their new chief dropped down into perfect push-up position right there on the conference room floor. "Anyone care to join me? I believe 50 was the standard number." His voice carried a hint of steel beneath its professional tone. "No, then perhaps we should discuss what real strength looks like. It's not about making others get down on the ground. It's about lifting them up." As he stood and straightened his uniform, not even breathing hard, the message was clear. There was a new standard in Brooklyn, and it started at the top. The atmosphere in the conference room had shifted. Where there had been shocked silence, now there was something else. Attention. Real attention, not just the kind officers gave during routine briefings. Chief Miller stood at the podium again, but now every eye in the room tracked his movements with new respect. 20 years ago, he began, pulling an old, worn badge from his pocket. "This belonged to my father. He was a beat cop in the Bronx, back when times were different. One night, he caught a kid trying to steal food from a corner store." Miller turned the badge over in his hands, letting the morning sunlight catch its scratched surface. "Instead of arresting him, my father bought the kid dinner. Then he drove him home, met his single mother working 3 jobs, and spent the next few years mentoring that kid." He paused, letting a small smile cross his face. "That kid was me." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Even Thompson and Martinez, still pale and shaken in the back row, leaned forward slightly. My father wasn't my biological dad. He was just a cop who understood that the badge isn't about power. It's about responsibility. Miller placed the old badge on the podium. When he and his wife adopted me a year later, he taught me that true authority doesn't come from making people fear you. It comes from earning their trust. Officer Jenny Rogers raised her hand hesitantly. Sir, is that why you did this undercover operation? To test our trustworthiness? No, Officer Rogers. I did it because sometimes we forget what it feels like to be on the other side of this badge. Miller touched his own badge briefly. We forget that every person we stop is someone's child, parent, or friend. We forget that every interaction we have can either build trust or destroy it. He clicked to a new slide, showing statistics from the department's civilian feedback system. These numbers tell a story. Every spike in complaints, every dropped case due to officer conduct, every viral video of abuse of power, they all chip away at the foundation of what we're supposed to be doing here. Moving away from the podium, Miller began walking between the rows of seats. Last night, I experienced what some of our citizens go through. The humiliation, the helplessness, the knowledge that even if you report it, nothing might change. He stopped beside Martinez's desk, where the officer's phone still displayed the video thumbnail. But I also saw something else. I saw officers who've forgotten the difference between respect earned and fear enforced. The room was so quiet you could hear the heat vents humming. Miller returned to the front, but didn't go behind the podium. Instead, he sat on the edge of the conference table, making eye contact with various officers. Starting today, we're going to remember what this badge really means. Every morning briefing will include civilian feedback. Every patrol car will have upgraded cameras, not just to protect civilians, but to protect you too. And most importantly, he stood up straight, his presence filling the room. Every single one of you will spend one shift per month in civilian clothes, interacting with our officers as regular citizens, because the only way to truly serve our community is to understand their experience firsthand. The silence that followed wasn't from shock anymore. It was from recognition. Recognition that they weren't just getting a new chief, they were getting a new purpose. By late afternoon, the precinct buzzed with a different kind of energy. Word had spread quickly, not just about Thompson and Martinez's termination, but about the changes Chief Miller was implementing. Officers gathered in small groups, discussing the morning's events in hushed tones that fell silent whenever Miller passed by. The chief sat in his new office, reviewing the paperwork from internal affairs. 2 badges lay on his desk, turned in less than an hour ago. Thompson and Martinez had left quietly, their final walk through the precinct watched by dozens of eyes. No one had stepped forward to defend them. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Miller called out, looking up to see Officer Jenny Rogers standing nervously in the doorway. "Sir, She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "I have something you should see." She placed her phone on his desk, showing a video from 3 weeks ago. Another fitness training incident, this time with an elderly man. Miller nodded slowly, understanding the courage this took. "Thank you, Officer Rogers. This is exactly the kind of accountability we need." As Rogers left, Miller glanced out his window. The afternoon sun caught the fresh snow, making it sparkle just like his father's old badge used to. On the street below, new recruit officers were arriving for the evening shift orientation. He grabbed his jacket and headed downstairs. The recruitment class stood at attention in the parking lot, their breath visible in the cold air. These fresh faces would be his first real opportunity to reshape the department's future. At ease, Miller called out, walking among them. "Before you start your training, I want to show you something." He removed his jacket, despite the cold, and dropped into push-up position on the snowy pavement. "Sir," one of the recruits stepped forward, confused. "What are you doing?" Leading by example, Miller replied, starting his push-ups. 1, 2, 3. To his satisfaction, without being ordered, every recruit joined him on the ground. Even some veteran officers, watching from the doorway, came out and took their positions in the snow. 48, 49, 50. The count ended with laughter and groans as everyone stood, brushing snow from their uniforms. But Miller wasn't done yet. "Every morning we'll do this together," he announced. Not as punishment, but as a reminder. A reminder that strength isn't about pushing others down. It's about lifting each other up. He looked at the mix of faces around him, recruits and veterans, all slightly out of breath, all paying close attention. Yesterday, this department had officers who thought authority meant having power over others. Today, they turned in their badges. Tomorrow, he smiled, seeing real understanding in the eyes watching him. Tomorrow, we show this city what real service looks like. As if on cue, a call came in over the radio. A family needed help after their car broke down in the cold. 3 officers immediately volunteered to respond. "Take hot chocolate with you," Miller called after them. "And remember, every person you meet out there deserves the same respect you'd want for your own family." Watching them drive off, Miller felt a familiar presence. Looking up, he saw his father's photo among the chief's portraits on the wall. The old man seemed to be smiling a bit more today. Inside his pocket, his phone buzzed with messages from the mayor's office about tomorrow's official ceremony. But Miller knew the real change had already begun, not with speeches or ceremonies, but with 50 push-ups on a frozen sidewalk and the simple choice to lead by example.